Once one understands this concept, you no longer look at this split or this many reps or that many reps or this volume or that volume. This notion of greasing the groove completely changed my conceptualization of strength training.
It's a very easy and very simple way to train. Strength comes very easily and very, very unexpectedly. Also, that builds muscle as well. It has a tonic effect just for anything that you can do with your brain or with your body, anything.
So could you please explain for people what greasing the groove is?
Ladies and gentlemen, grease the groove, we are talking about...
I attribute you with popularizing, maybe you invented it, but certainly popularizing the term like greasing the groove. This notion of greasing the groove completely changed my conceptualization of strength training. I was so tuned to this notion of training a body part, creating an adaptation, then waiting for the adaptation to occur, and then training the body part again. You know, the arguments are all over the internet, 2 times a week, 3 times a week. And then I came across this concept of greasing the groove, which as a neuroscientist felt so intuitively correct, and turns out to be correct. You'll explain what it is, but the idea that more frequent training or practicing of a movement opens up a tremendous number of opportunities for development of strength, of size, hypertrophy if one wants, and I would say just generally more flexibility over one's total fitness program. Once one understands this concept, you no longer look at this split or this many reps or that many reps or this volume or that volume. All that is important, but you can start to think about it through the lens of the nervous system. And to me, it was like water in a desert to finally encounter something that brought together all these different concepts. So could you please explain for people what greasing the groove is?
Ladies and gentlemen, grease the groove, we are talking about, let's use an analogy. Let's imagine that you are a bow hunter and you work in your garage, and then you walk out of your garage and you shoot an arrow, and you just go back to going about your business, just working in your garage. Or let's say you're a kid who practices martial arts, and on every break between classes, you just go in the corner and you practice your kata. This is the best way to practice your skill in small portions in a spaced out manner. What's really fascinating is traditional education and traditional strength training. It's based on the cramming model. So remember cramming for an exam. So you're studying at night and you somehow squeak by and you pass it. Okay, great. And then a couple of days later, you happily forget everything. So in contrast, imagine that let's say you're studying a foreign language. You write words on cards, and at every opportunity, you're standing in line in the bank. So the lesser mortals are fooling around on their phones. You're just going through your deck, like, oh, can I translate this word? I go, put it back in the deck, flip it over. Then next time you're in some other place, you do this again. So this is an example of space practice versus the traditional mass practice. And the evidence of the superiority of space practice is just overwhelming. It goes back to the 19th century, and there's at least more than 1,000 papers published on that. And still very few people do that, which is really sad. And strength is a skill. If we look at what's going on, it's the Hebbian mechanisms. So pretty much every time that you activate a particular connection, synaptic connection, between the neurons, that connection becomes stronger. So if you do it over and over and over. So the grease the groove is the analogy is that command that's coming in from your brain to your muscles, that's the groove. That's that pathway. And the more you use it, pretty much the more greased it becomes. So it's like becomes a superconductor. So in the future, you don't have to try as hard to lift the same amount of weight, or you can try the same amount and you can lift harder. So we haven't even addressed the neural drive yet. We just pretty much made the motor neurons more responsive to it. It's a very easy and very simple way to train. And strength comes very easily and very, very unexpectedly. To make sure that it does happen, you have to address the issue of specificity. So specificity pretty much means without getting too much into the weeds, to get stronger, first of all, you need to lift weights that are heavy enough. And if you're looking about percentages of 1 rep max, we're looking at like 75 to 85 typically. If you go too light, you don't make the impression on your nervous system, and it's just not specific enough. If you go too heavy, very quickly, you're just gonna burn yourself out. And so pretty much like it's a weight that's heavy enough to respect and light enough not to fear. And the second of all, and this is very surprising, is you only do about half or fewer reps that you possibly could do. So for example, let's say that you're lifting 80% of your 1 rep max, and let's say that you're able to do 8 reps maximum with it. That's your we're just fairly common. Well, you're only going to do about three to four reps per set. And that's it. And the gym bros at this point go crazy, like, where's the intensity? Well, intensity in strength training is just how heavy the weight is. It has nothing to do with the effort. And it's been proven over and over that that's much more important than how hard you're exerting yourself. There are times for that. There are absolute times for that. But if the weight is heavy enough, and if you do half the repetitions that you possibly could do, you're going to get stronger. It's very safe, and you're not going to burn out psychologically, and it's also very easy on your body. So also that builds muscle as well, purely because you're able to do a very high volume of work. To summarize the Grease the Groove, you're trying to train moderately heavy as often as possible while staying as fresh as possible. And if you decide to do it in the gym, a very simple protocol would be a set every 10 minutes. It sounds really bizarre. Like, why? Why would you rest for so long? This apparently has to do with initial memory consolidation. There's so much is still unknown. So we do know the Grease the Groove works great, but we speculate that some of it has to do with some of the same phenomena related to learning in other fields. So if you're doing something over and over, like you're saying 2 + 2 is 4, 2 + 2 is 4, you're just using your short-term memory. You're not memorizing anything. But if you say 2 + 2 is 4, you go get a coffee, you come back and you try 2 + 2, 4. So there's that desirable difficulty that you have in there, and you have to process that instead of just go through the groove. That apparently helps this adaptation. So rest for at least 10 minutes. Do sets of about the repetitions of half of what you're possibly able to do, and listen to your body. Typically train 2-3 days in a row, and then take a day off, but listen to your body.
Are you doing anything in the rest periods between these 10 minutes? So is it, let's say, bench press, wait 10 minutes till you bench press again, but in the meantime, you're doing Zercher squat 5 minutes after the first bench press?
That's one of the ways to do that. You can do up to 3 exercises at the same time. So let's say like Zercher squat and the bench press and maybe a third thing, but I'd say those two are enough. And another option is you can do that. You can incorporate this into, if you do only one exercise, you can squeeze it into your lifestyle or your athletic practice. So for example, in, let's say you're teaching a track practice or martial arts class, and every 10 minutes on the clock, you just have the class drop and do 3 hard, let's say 3 one-arm push-up, okay, and then get back to the class. So there's no interference whatsoever. In fact, it's better than no interference. So if you do strength work that's not exhausting in nature and that's not novel to you, it has a tonic effect just for anything that you can do with your brain or with your body, anything. So what you have is, by having this short, very small dose, like a nano practice of strength, you rejuvenate yourself and your productivity increases so much.
I suppose if someone has access to the appropriate equipment at home, you could incorporate Grease the Groove into your entire day.
That's ideal, yes. Yeah. And obviously it's difficult with some equipment, but what you could do, you could use the heavy-duty grippers. You could do one-arm push-ups. You could keep a kettlebell under your desk and press it at every opportunity. And again, the idea is really just practice. You just try to hit a perfect track.
A lot of people who would like to train more for strength, train more often for strength. The challenge sometimes it's that we feel depleted and tired afterward. Is there a way to use strength training or other forms of training to improve cognitive function?
People don't realize that you're using different muscle groups, but still using the same brain. If the strength work is familiar and non-exhaustive, it absolutely facilitates whatever it is that you do afterwards. One thing that will absolutely help is
in which one could use their physical training to give them for lack of a better word, a boost into the day. So you're getting stronger, you're developing your health, and you're also able to then lean into your day with more focus and attention. That would be the ultimate scenario. Okay. Yeah.
Well, there's obviously, we're looking at a zero-sum game. So you only have so much, your resources are limited. One thing that will absolutely help is fragmentation. It's been proven that dividing up a given workload into smaller chunks allows you, doesn't matter what it is, whether it's endurance training or strength training or some cognitive work, you're able to do more. And that's one thing that to consider. The other is obviously the feedback. You have to listen to your body pretty much. Soviets stressed very much that you have to take the cybernetic approach. You have to have the feedback. No matter what the training plan says, Arkady Vorobyev says you have to listen to that feedback. And freshness in the Soviet system of strength training, and not just in weightlifting, freshness was paramount. It's even better. Let's talk about how track athletes in the Soviet Union trained for strength, and that will be even more applicable to a lot of the listeners, because they definitely didn't spend 2.5 hours in the gym. So, Professor Vladimir Dyachkov, he was a head coach, and he was one of the first to implement heavy lifting for the track. Right after the Soviets decide, hey, look at these Americans, lifting heavy weights, Bruce Randall and Paul Anderson and Canadian Doug Hepburn. So these lifters, he says, always do low reps. So they would never do more than 3-4 reps, even with the lightest weight, even with the warm-up weight. They spent a lot of time doing just singles and doubles, and it was absolutely essential that they stayed fresh. And part of it was just how they felt. Part of it is the performance, how well they jumped, and so on, and how they felt after. So they found if you're really obsessive about it, you have that tonic effect that lasts at least until the next day. And the tonic effect is both for your strength, for your power, but also for your cognitive functions as well. But it's also very, very interesting that, here's an idea, do a bench press the next day before you're competing in the jump. Or do a heavy squat the day before you're competing as a thrower. So it's very interesting how the opposite part of the body stimulating that was very, very helpful. Very interesting phenomena. So they found if the strength work is familiar and non-exhaustive, it absolutely facilitates whatever it is that you do afterwards. This is where track athletes were very different from a lot of other people. They tried to restrict their volume as much as possible of strength training, in part because, they had to do other things and because they had to stay fresh. So if you look at the volume, if you look at, generally speaking, how many repetitions that you want to perform per exercise, per training session, and again, these are purely empirical numbers. They come from Soviet weightlifting, but they were also applied in track. So the minimal volume is 10 to 20 repetitions total. So minimum. And optimal is 20 to 30. Maximal, it becomes 30 to 50 in that window. So when you're looking at 20 to 30 reps, maybe on the lower end right there, you're going to build strength. And if you're also are going to not go to failure and rest sufficiently between sets, unless you're greasing the groove, you need to look at least 5 minutes pretty much, and that's both for neural and biochemical reasons, but more is really better. Unfortunately, really a lot of it just comes down to listening to your body and just using your judgment. I wish I had any better answer here.
I think it's a terrific answer. I like to leave the gym with some gas in the tank. Because, I get paid to think and to speak, as it were, not to lift, but...
And many great thinkers in the strength world, starting from Lederman back 100 years ago to Soviet weightlifting authorities like, Rodionov and Roman, and later on somebody like even Steve Justa was a very colorful individual, just brilliant strength athlete. A farmer from Nebraska who just came up with some fantastic protocols, but he would say that you've got to finish stronger than when you started.
I love that.
And that theme is very much permeates professional or high-level strength training, where this mentality of a workout or try to get smoked or pumped or throw up in the bucket, they would look at you as that's insane. One of the reasons that also Soviets restricted the number of reps in the squat, because you do sets of 10 in the squat, you're going to definitely put on some mass, no question about it. But one of the reasons they restricted that, very few people did sets of 10 except for heavyweights who had a hard time bulking, and even more, is like, okay, that's too much cardiorespiratory stress. And even though Soviet weightlifters did some general physical training like cross-country running or playing soccer, but they're not trying to get their cardio on the lifting platform. That was just made no sense whatsoever. So restricting the reps will go a very long way. Increasing the rest periods to at least 5 minutes would go a very long way. And restricting the number of exercises. Because people don't realize that you're using different muscle groups, but still using the same brain. You're still using the same adrenals. And all that stuff really adds up. And so I would say during one training practice, maybe 2, maybe 3 exercises max, lifts. And nothing wrong with doing just one. And yeah, if you want to, do your curls and whatever calves later, that's fine. But you can tack it on in the end, or you can do it totally separate. Those things don't really zap you. You can just come in a separate day and just enjoy your calf burn. Strength is the mother quality of all the other qualities. Without a foundation of strength, you cannot build anything. In marathon running, it's been proven that putting athletes on a heavy, low repetition strength regimen, it makes them race faster. The pull-ups are one of the best general strength exercises.
Most people would like to have some level of endurance, some level of strength, and feel healthy and presumably look however they want to look. But let's set aesthetics aside for the moment. How do you think about this thing we call fitness?
Well, first of all, Andrew, strength is the mother quality of all the other qualities. Without a foundation of strength, you cannot build anything. So any athletic event requires a base of strength. Of course, that shot putter is going to need much more strength than triathlon athlete, but they all need strength. Speaking of which, in triathlon, in marathon running, in distance, in cycling, it's been proven that putting athletes on a heavy, low repetition strength regimen, the kind that doesn't really add muscle but just makes you stronger neurologically, and it makes them race faster. So once you're stronger, everything becomes easier. How much stronger you need to get, that will vary. In the Soviet Union, they had something called the model athlete. So they figured out that for every particular event, your odds of succeeding are going to be much higher if you're able to, squat this much or bench this much and jump this high and so on and so forth. And this is easy enough to find these numbers for your individual sport and talk to various coaches. For people who are not competitive athletes, who just want to enjoy life, you just need to think about having a reserve of strength for whatever it is that you might do. So look at some PT standards in, let's say, in the military or in law enforcement, and possibly apply them to yourself. As long as you're mobile, as long as you're symmetrical, and those are the things you have to address first. You need to look into work of Greg Cook, for example. Then strength has to be your priority. Once you have reached a certain level of strength that's appropriate for your sport or appropriate for your lifestyle, at that point you can just maintain it and focus on other qualities.
What movements do you believe, if they exist, all people should include in their weekly routine, someplace, when thinking about how to develop, perhaps maintain, but for most people it's going to be the goal of still achieving some strength?
Okay.
Strength increase, excuse me.
I think there has to be a very low quantity of exercises, just very few exercises you want to focus on. And I'm going to give you some options to choose from. Mm-hmm. So what we try to do at Strong First in my company, my School of Strength, is we try to provide people with various simple, very low-tech, high-concept ways of addressing, reaching their needs. Because for one reason or another, for this individual, the barbell is the preferred tool. For another, it's the kettlebell or body weight or something else. So I'm not going to say that if you don't do kettlebell swings or barbell squats, you'll never amount to anything. That's just not true. If we are looking at the barbell, I would start out with the narrow sumo deadlift. And the narrow sumo deadlift, so if you look at powerlifters, classic example would be Ed Cohn. That's a narrow stance sumo. I'm not talking about wide sumo. That's a very sport-specific event. And you practice that first. You learn how to hip hinge. It's extremely important to learn how to hip hinge. Again, Stuart stressed that how important it is for your back health and for your longevity. So you learn to do that. Then whether you decide to pursue the deadlift or not, if you decide not to pursue high numbers in the deadlift, maybe it's not appropriate for you, or maybe you like in the coaching, fantastic exercise for everybody is a Zercher squat. So in the Zercher squat, you hold the bar like this in the crooks of your elbows. So it's resting right here. It's possible to pick it up off the ground, but it's an advanced skill. It's an advanced skill. Better just to walk it off the rack. The advantage of the Zercher squat over, let's say, the back squat or the front squat is even if you have messed up shoulders, wrists, elbows, you still can do that. Coaching the Zercher squat is very easy, very simple. And you have tremendous reflexive stabilization of your midsection. It's just very, very powerful. So you acquire that skill of getting tight. So getting high numbers on that exercise in the Zercher, so let's say an athlete could shoot for double body weight, that's a really good goal. You find some pressing exercise. And again, if we're sticking with the example of the barbell, the bench press has gotten bad reputation, thanks to the gym bros. And, all gym bros do is the bench pretty much. Well, these days they also check out their phones, I guess. But if you look at athletes, athletes who also do some lower body work, some posterior chain work, and something for the midsection, and again, the Zercher squat could address that, they are making a great use of the bench press. So it's a very simple exercise. Well, not very simple, it's a relatively simple exercise. And unlike other pressing exercises, it allows you to make strength gains with a very low volume of training. So you can do several sets of 5 once a week in the bench press and keep getting stronger. Good luck doing that in the overhead press or in the one-arm push-up or something like that. So those are just a couple examples. There are many other examples. You can do snatch grip deadlifts. You can, list is very, very long. We can address the same thing in the same way with kettlebells. You can look at the body weight exercises, but you need to find several exercises that have a reputation for building strength that reaches beyond the ability to do this exercise. Mm-hmm. If you just do curls, you're gonna get better at curls, but not at much else. So you find several exercises that you enjoy, that don't hurt you, that you have the equipment available, that you got the proper coaching for, and you pretty much stick with them. And there's absolutely no reason for you to change these exercises. It's possible to change them on the margins, from a wide grip bench press to narrow grip bench press, squats with a pause, and so on and so forth. But you don't really have to do a great variety of things.
Would a combination across the week of some sort of squat, let's say the Zercher squat, perhaps a kettlebell swing or something else for posterior chain, pull up and dip, be a fairly comprehensive program?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm a fan of dips. I like dips a lot. I heard you say that you were, some years ago, you said that you were using dips for economy of time. And I started getting into dips. I haven't quite figured out the best way to load dips because once you get past 15, 20 repetitions of the body weight dip, it gets, turns into something else.
Sure, absolutely.
Turns into aerobic exercise, perhaps.
Luke Ames, he was a powerlifter from the golden age of American powerlifting. He says anything over 6 reps is bodybuilding.
Yeah, I'm trying to stay in the lower rep range today. I'll talk about this with you more because I think a growing number of people, both men and women who are starting to do weight training or really incorporate strength training into their program, are seeking a combination of strength and perhaps endurance as well, without putting on too much size. Maybe size in some select body parts.
Well, Andrew, I think they need to do possibly several different types of training. But going back to your examples, dips are fantastic if you can, if your shoulders can handle them, if you know how to do them. It's a great exercise, but not particularly democratic. That's the problem. You mentioned the example of pull-ups. Absolutely, pull-ups are one of the best general strength exercises. And again, to your listeners, general versus special. Special in Soviet terminology just means sport-specific. So the carryover, when you start doing pull-ups, when you excel at pull-ups or the dips, you are going to get a carryover so far beyond these exercises, which is exactly the reason you do that. So I like your choices very much. Yeah. Franco Columbu, for example, being super strong and winning Mr. Olympia, he won the best abs. He didn't train abs. Midsection training is one of the most misunderstood and messed up areas of physical culture. High reps are not necessary. You're not going to burn off fat by doing more reps. You're just going to irritate your back. The point really is tension and attention. You're going to be able to get as strong as you need in the abs and get your six-pack or whatever.
I'd love to talk about abdominal or rather core work.
Sure. Midsection training is one of the most misunderstood and messed up areas of physical culture. There's 1,000 different exercises and people are like, oh, you gotta have variety, this many reps. That's not the point. The point really is tension and attention. So those are the two things. Ideally, your best first step is really learning abdominal tension through something like a Zercher squat or double kettlebell front squat, where the load distribution is such that it forces reflexive stabilization and you feel, oh, that's what tight abs feel like. And getting somebody just weak on a plank, it's hopeless. There's absolutely not going to happen. It's not. There are ways of building up to it, yes, by rolling in the back and so on. So, but if you don't have that option, or if you choose not to exercise it, you have to be extremely attentive to the details of what's going on within your abdomen. So you need to learn things like, for example, you need to learn to contract the pelvic diaphragm, pull your butt up, because you're trying to constrain the intra-abdominal pressure. Then you need to learn how to direct attention to the different parts of your abdomen, almost like a bodybuilder, but really not quite, more like a gymnast. There is this argument in strength world about, internal focus, external focus and cueing, and the agreement is in motor learning. Well, external focus cueing is so much better than focusing on, whatever happens within the individual muscle. It may be true in the beginning, and it may be true outside of the strength game, but any top strength athlete that you will meet, they have their own internal cues how they do something. Later on, they may forget them. It just inspires them, but they know how to. This is how I engage the lat in the bench press. George Halbert, bench press world record holder, famously said it took him many years to finally understand how the triceps is used in the bench press. Many years. So there's a lot of internal component, and for the abs, very, very much. So you have to learn how to very much direct your attention there. To get high tension, you have to keep the reps low. Like you said, 5 sets of 5, perfect. High reps are not necessary. You're not going to burn off fat by doing more reps. You're just going to irritate your back. That's all you're going to do, nothing else. So you treat your ab training very much like a strength event. And if you do that, you're going to get those results. And finally, the final detail is you need to use that intra-abdominal pressure as your friend. Because in lifting like a deadlift or a squat or something, the intra-abdominal pressure helps you, it supports you. When you're doing abdominal work, you work against that intra-abdominal pressure. You just create that pressure and contract against it. This is something called internal isometrics. So it's kind of interesting. It's just a combination of classic strength work with very internalized, kind of almost like a martial arts approach to it. Then you need to learn also how to obviously use your abs in lifting. And once you do, and this is the beauty, you don't really have to train your abs anymore. So Franco Columbu, for example, a great example, in addition to winning, being super strong and winning Mr. Olympia, he won the best abs. He didn't train abs. He told me, I hate ab training. He just would stay tight whenever he did his heavy lifts. And this is pretty much what happens. When you reach a certain level of strength and a certain level of awareness, simply staying tight during your strength work and also employing power breathing, which is very important, you're going to be able to get as strong as you need in the abs and get your six-pack or whatever, provided you don't eat the Twinkies. So how do you pressurize in fact, may I show an abdominal exercise right now that is just sitting at this table? That's also going to teach you teach your audience how to properly pressurize for lifting. So normally it's better done standing. So it's not for people with high blood pressure or heart concerns. Check with your doctor if that's the situation. So you take a normal breath in your abdomen and you pull up your butt pretty much. Like imagine you have to go to the restroom and you can't quite, it's far away. You're trying to stop yourself. And then you put your tongue between your teeth and you start and you start hissing. And you do this in this ratcheting kind of manner. So try to keep all the pressure out of your head, out of your neck, direct all the pressure, all this pressure is just really staying below. And so this type of hissing, you will notice that very rapidly you're going to contract everything around your waist. So everything around your waist is going to contract, and you're going to strain your abdomen. You're also going to start learn how to properly stabilize yourself under heavy weights. The difference between using this technique for lifting and for just training the abs, when you're training the abs, there's going to be some spinal flexion. Not a whole lot. You don't want to do a lot of that. There's going to be some spinal flexion. When you're doing that under a heavy barbell squat, you're maintaining your spine as neutral. It's like your body stays a cylinder. And you're going to hold your breath pretty much. But the idea is the same. So it's like, so the Valsalva maneuver one Russian coach called it, it's an exhalation that didn't happen, okay? Because people don't know how to hold their breath properly. They just, and then eyes are bulging out, well, there's no stability right here. So first of all, you gotta inhale low. And how do you do that? If you watch top lifters, how they do that, they will do it through pursed lips. You can also do it through the nose, but you cannot do it through big wide open mouth. So I'll show you why. So if you folks can try it at home. So if you put your hand on your stomach and try to do an abdominal breath, doesn't go very well. Now, for contrast, pinch off one nostril. Take an abdominal breath. Or you can do that through pursed lips. Try it again. So you see,
more resistance.
More resistance, and again, you're engaging the diaphragm instead of just your thorax right there. And then after that, it's that exhalation that didn't happen. Do you see?
I see.
And if you're doing that for an exercise that's long in duration, if you don't want to be holding your breath too long, then we have an expression that comes from one of the karate styles, breathing behind the shield. So right now I can speak to you, but I'm still just as tight. So you see what you're doing. So the way we test it the way we teach it at our workshops is you lie on the ground, I tell you to tense up, then I'm gonna stand on your stomach and I'm gonna have you sing a song. And then finally what you gotta learn to do is you gotta learn to match the breath with the force, synchronize when you're punching, when you're throwing, when you're lifting, you have to learn how to match that contraction, the timing of the abdominal contraction and the pressurization, sometimes exhalation, sometimes just pretending to, with the effort.
When one throws a punch, is it true that exhaling is actually providing additional power? Or?
There's no question about it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's been measured. It's been measured on fighters. It's also been measured in lifting as well. There was a study that was done in the West even when screaming increases strength significantly. And again, this is not just a psychological component. I mean, there may be some psychological component to that, but again, there's this very distinct increase of strength through that reflex. And it's very easy for the listeners to test that. Get a dynamometer, hand gripper, and just test yourself on that and just test it out on with different breathing patterns and just see what happens. And whenever, this idiotic practice at some gyms, you can grunt right here, and it's just, well, I guess you can be strong here. And yeah, of course, if you're doing this on purpose, you're walking in with the bros and you're just trying to make noise to attract attention, that's wrong. But strength is a noisy endeavor, so there may be some hissing, there may be some grunting. It's just absolutely unavoidable. And it's if you're trying to be quiet, and if you're trying to be a lady or a gentleman, well, maybe it's for somewhere else.
What should I do during my rest periods?
All right. Well, first of all, whenever your heart rate is high, the very first thing is not to suddenly stop, because there are one-way valves in the veins that, whenever you contract the muscles of the legs, they help to milk the blood back through to the heart. So basically, they reduce the stress on the heart. So just walk it out first, the first step, if your heart rate was high. Then the second thing is you want to do exercises. You want to do relaxation, myo-relaxation, muscle relaxation exercise. What they are is, if you watch boxers, how they, shake off their shoulders and drop their hands and do things like that. These exercises go back to the 30s. Soviets used them since the 30s, and they used them with elite athletes, kids in grade schools, and everybody. So these exercises serve several functions. One is, if you are doing an exercise that is strength exercise in nature, some of the cross bridges are stuck pretty much. And so your muscle is thixotropic, it's like gel. So by moving your muscle in a passive manner, you get it unstuck. And so you restore circulation, obviously. The other reason is, again, control of muscular tension is very, very important. It's important to learn how to contract the muscle for strength. It's very important how to relax for speed, for endurance, just for a happy life. You look at the best sprinters, note how relaxed their faces are when they run their jaws. Relax how relaxed their necks are. So relaxation is something that's practiced, just like tension. So regardless of what exercise that you just did, shaking off, we call this fast and loose drills, shaking like passive, like turn your muscles to fat. So you want to do this for a little bit. Then after that, it depends how long is your rest. So if you're taking, and depends what exactly that you're doing. In some extreme examples, let's say that you're a sprinter. Remember we talked like doing sprint repeats with, let's say, 100 meters in 15 minutes. You think, wow, sounds like a great training session. Well, the problem is these guys do need these 15 minutes to get the acid out of the system and have some other functions to recover. But after a couple of minutes, the CNS excitability goes down. So what the Soviets figured out back in the 40s still is what you do then, after you walked it off, after you shook it off, you here and there, you insert some very kind of like light and easy hops or whatever using the same muscle groups. So these poor athletes really have a complicated rest protocol. There's really no rest for the wicked there. If you are a lifter who's taking very long rest periods in between, let's say you take those 10 minutes, then after your heart rate is down and after you shook off and after you walk till you can just sit down, you can do whatever you want. Do not sit a slouch, because obviously Stu McGill explained why that's not a good idea. And speaking of slouching, one reason that runners get their backs jacked up after running or some endurance event is, again, they go into their knees and they get into that collapsed posture, and their discs are really pliable and warm after the run, and then suddenly put them into flexion and they get messed up. So yeah, you also gotta, like you point out, to watch our posture, but you really gotta watch your posture during recovery, because you slump between your sets of squats and then you could blow something out right there.
Interesting. I used to think that I would have this recurring sort of lower back hip thing that I feel is under control. And I used to think that it correlated with travel and something about maybe not sleeping as well and traveling perhaps. But what I've noticed is even if I just sit too much after training my legs hard, I end up with this back issue. So just moving to standing desk configuration after training legs, irrespective of travel, has really helped. I mean, nowadays there's all this excitement about walking. I don't know if I don't know how much time you spend on social media, but like walking's the new thing for 2024.
Okay.
People discovered walking can lower, post-meal blood glucose. I mean, all stuff that was that's intuitive, great thing to do. And I'm a fan of walking, but in no small part because it just feels like it loosens up everything after training. And I like to train early in the day if possible. And I notice a dramatic reduction in kind of aches and strains as a function.
Also, the other thing you can do, I remember when I watched your podcast with Stu McGill, you mentioned that upward facing dog, Cobra helps you, right?
Yeah.
Putting yourself in extension.
Anything into extension.
So for people for whom that works, it's you can just lie on the floor in your elbows and just read a book. So for example, at Strong First courses, when people do exercise and then we teach them. So we have several authorized postures. So you either have to sit ramrod straight, you can sit in a lotus or seiza or something like that, or you can, half kneel still upright, or you can lie on your stomach. So we do not allow this collapsed posture, because this is a great way to get hurt. Plus, you look like a slacker. When you're a slacker, mentally, you're not going to be focused on whatever you're supposed to be doing. So I think that's a good idea.